Why should I believe any one interpretation of the Bible? That's a great question. There are so many views that are espoused, and often with such passion. You can't just by the urgency of the argument believe this or that view. So what are we going to go on? Well, I think there's a few steps we could take that would probably get us at least very close to the correct interpretation. First of all, start with the idea that on what basis is this interpretation founded? What translation is used? Many times I've found that people will have a distinctive interpretation of a verse based on a single translation's unique phrase. And that's a tangent unto itself, and then the interpretation takes it even further. It might be safest to begin by interpreting any verse by looking at a number of reliable translations, and only from the consensus of those translations develop your own understanding of that verse. So what are reliable translations? Well, probably some that are commonly used today and you would find useful. The English Standard Version is often used today in many circles. It's relatively recent, in the early 2000s. We've got the old reliable New International Version. It's been around for some decades, but it's still very useful and is a well-regarded text. You might also have, for instance, the New American Study Bible. You could also go to the New Revised Standard Version. There are perhaps a few others, but the main idea is to not go solely on the tangent of one interpretation and one translation alone, but find a center from 2 or 3 or 4 respected versions. The next step is to find how that interpretation of a particular verse fits the context, the immediate before and after of that particular passage. Does this interpretation make sense with what's just gotten done, or what's going to now soon happen? Does it explain the result or the purpose of what's just been going on? Does it give a reason for the things that are soon going to follow? Ask those kind of questions and see if there's a flow that seems to carry along the whole narrative. If, on the other hand, you find an interpretation that stands completely off by itself, that's content only with a single verse but not those around it, I'd back away from it. And the final step, it seems to me, is what does it say about Christ? If that interpretation points you to Jesus' incarnation as God and man, at his sacrificial death, followed after a perfect life, and that acceptance of his sacrificial death and resurrection by grace and faith, you're probably on a good basis. If there's anything in that interpretation, however, that goes again, contrary to that, is a tangent or even going against the grain, take a long, hard look at why it would possibly have something against the central message that we have just said. Christ, incarnate Son of God, living perfectly, dying for us, rising again, and offering that life to us by grace and faith. So, gather your tools, study several versions, look at the context, and focus on Christ, and there's good reason to think you'll have the right interpretation.